The neon sign outside O'Malley's had been flickering for 3 years. Nobody bothered to fix it anymore. It didn't matter. Everyone who needed to find the place already knew where it was. Corner of Vermont and Eighth. The kind of bar that didn't have a website, didn't take credit cards, didn't give a damn if you were having a good day or a bad one. You came, you drank, you left. Simple as that. Tonight was different, though. Tonight was the last night. Bukowski pushed through the heavy door at 6 in the evening, early for him. But this wasn't a regular night. The place smelled like it always did. Stale beer, cigarettes that people smoked out back despite the law, and something else, something harder to name. Defeat, maybe. Or just the accumulated breath of 30 years of broken dreams fermenting in the wood. Mickey, the owner, stood behind the bar wiping glasses that would never be clean. His hands shook a little. Not from the booze, Mickey never drank, but from the weight of knowing that tomorrow this place would be empty. Sold to some developer who was going to tear it down and build condos. Luxury living for people who wouldn't know a real bar if it bit them in the ass. If you're the type who understands why a place like O'Malley's matters, why some spaces hold more truth than churches ever did, then stick around. There's something here for you. And hey, if this resonates, hit that subscribe button. We're going to need each other for what comes next. Bukowski settled onto his usual stool, the third from the end. The vinyl was split, held together with duct tape that had turned black with grime. He'd sat on this stool so many nights, he'd worn the shape of his ass into it. A monument to consistency, if nothing else. The usual? Mickey asked, but his voice carried none of its usual gruffness. There was something elegiac about it, like a priest giving last rites. Yeah, and keep them coming until we close. For good. Mickey pulled a draft, watching the foam rise with the attention of a man who knew he was performing this ritual for the final time. The beer was cheap, always had been. Not the craft shit that was taking over the city, just beer. Cold and wet and honest about what it was. The door opened, and Sammy walked in. Sammy the gambler, though calling him a gambler, implied he won sometimes. Sammy was a loser, pure and simple, but at least he was good at it. Consistent. He'd lost his house, his car, his wife, not necessarily in that order. And now he was working on losing whatever self-respect he had left. He wore the same brown suit every day, shiny at the elbows, cigarette burns on the lapels like medals of dishonor. "Mickey," Sammy said, sitting 2 stools down from Bukowski. Not close enough to suggest intimacy, but close enough to acknowledge shared citizenship in this particular Republic of the Damned. "Sammy, I heard." Yeah. That was the extent of the conversation for a while. What else was there to say? The facts were simple and brutal. The bar was closing, the world was changing, and none of them had a place in whatever was coming next. Bukowski lit a cigarette. Technically, you couldn't smoke in here anymore, but who was going to say anything? The health department? On the last night of a bar's life, fuck them. Some rules stop mattering when the whole game is ending. The smoke curled up toward the ceiling, where it joined 3 decades of its predecessors in a yellow film that would be scrubbed away by whatever soulless corporation bought the building. They'd renovate, sterilize, remove every trace that this place had ever existed. That's what they did now. Erase the past. Pretend it never happened. Sell the future to people who could afford it. By 7 o'clock, more of the regulars had filtered in. There was Tommy the truck driver, who'd been coming here since before his 3 divorces. There was Angela, who used to work the streets down on Western, but had retired when her knees gave out. She cleaned houses now, legal work. But she still had the eyes of someone who'd seen what people were like when they stopped pretending. And there was Dolores. Dolores, who'd been a beauty once, before the crystal meth and the 3 stints in county and the boyfriend who'd broken her jaw so badly they had to wire it shut for 6 months. She still came to O'Malley's because it was the only place that didn't care what you used to be. Here, you were just another body taking up space at the bar, and that was enough. "I can't believe it's really happening," Dolores said to no one in particular. Her voice was rough, scratched by too many cigarettes and screams that nobody heard. "Everything ends," Bukowski said. It wasn't profound. It was just true. "Yeah, but this place..." She trailed off, looking around at the dim interior, the dartboard with half the numbers missing, the jukebox that only played songs from before 1985, the pool table with the torn felt. This place was ours, you know. She was right. O'Malley's wasn't much, but it was theirs. The beautiful people didn't come here. The young professionals with their craft cocktails and their dating apps didn't come here. This was a sanctuary for the broken, the forgotten, the people who tried the American dream and found it wanting, or found that it didn't want them back. Before we go further into this last night, I need to know something. Where are you listening to this from? What part of the world? What kind of room? And give me a number, 0 to 10, for how this story is landing so far. Drop it in the comments. I want to know who's out there, who understands why a dive bar's death matters. The thing about last nights is that they loosen tongues. People say things they've been holding back for years, because what's the point of keeping secrets when the confessional booth is about to be demolished? Mickey poured himself a shot, the first Bukowski had ever seen him take, and raised it to the room, to O'Malley's, and to all you beautiful bastards who made it what it was. They drank to that. Even Angela, who usually nursed 1 beer all night because money was tight, drank. "You know what I'll miss most?" Tommy said, his voice thick with beer and sentiment. "I'll miss having somewhere to go where nobody asks me how I'm doing and actually wants an answer. You ask someone that question out there." He gestured vaguely toward the door, toward the world beyond. "And they don't want the truth. They want you to say fine so they can move on with their day. But in here, you could say you were drowning and nobody would blink. They'd just buy you another drink and let you drown in peace." "That's because we were all drowning," Sammy said. "Misery doesn't need company. It just needs to not be alone." Bukowski nodded. That was closer to wisdom than most philosophy he'd read. The bar wasn't about camaraderie in the cheap sense. It wasn't about friendship or connection or any of that therapeutic bullshit. It was about parallel suffering, shared space for individual despair. You didn't come here to feel better. You came here to feel what you felt without someone trying to fix you. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. 8 o'clock became 9, became 10. The regulars kept arriving, a steady trickle of the damned, each one bringing their own private apocalypse to add to the collective end. There was Frank, who'd worked at the GM plant until it closed and took 1,500 jobs with it. There was Maria, whose son was doing 25 to life, for something he probably did, but maybe didn't. It didn't matter anymore. There was Eddie, who'd been a boxer once, good enough to almost make something of himself before his jaw turned to glass and his dreams to dust. They all came. They came because they had to. Because this was the last time they could come. Because tomorrow, this place would be gone. And with it, the only space in their lives that had ever accepted them exactly as they were. I remember the first time I came here, Angela said, her voice soft, with something that might have been nostalgia or might have been regret. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. It was 1987. I'd just gotten off the bus from Louisiana with $43 and a suitcase held together with rope. I didn't know anybody. Didn't know the city. I walked past this place 3 times before I got up the courage to go in. What made you come in? Dolores asked. The sign. O'Malley's. It sounded Irish, and my daddy was Irish, and I thought maybe that was a sign. Like maybe somebody up there was looking out for me. She laughed, a bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. Was anyone looking out for you? Mickey asked. No. But I found this place anyway. Found Mickey. Found all of you eventually. Found somewhere I could just exist without having to perform being okay. The jukebox played Hank Williams. I'm so lonesome I could cry. Appropriate, Bukowski thought. Hank understood. Hank got it. The loneliness wasn't the problem. The loneliness was the truth. The problem was all the noise the world made trying to cover it up. By 11 o'clock, the place was full. Not packed. O'Malley's never got packed. But full in the way a church might be full on Easter. The faithful had returned for one last service. Bukowski watched them all. These were his people, though he'd never say it out loud, not in some sentimental way. But they were the ones who understood that life was mostly about enduring. And the best you could hope for was to find a place where the enduring didn't feel quite so lonely. Sammy was 3 sheets to the wind, which was early for him. Usually he paced himself better. But tonight, there was no tomorrow to pace for. You know what my old man told me? Sammy said to the beer in his hand. He said, son, the house always wins. Always. So the trick is to find a game where losing doesn't hurt so much. Smart man, Bukowski said. Nah, he was a drunk and a fool, but he was right about that. The house always wins, and O'Malley's, he gestured around the bar. This was the game where losing didn't hurt so much. We were all losing anyway. At least here we could lose together. We weren't losing, Tommy said. We were just not winning. What's the difference? Intent. Losing means you were trying to win. Not winning means you stopped trying and found something else to do with your time. Like drinking, Frank said. Exactly like drinking. They laughed at that. Not happy laughter, but the kind of laughter that comes from recognizing a shared truth that would sound pathetic to anyone who wasn't there. Midnight came and went. The clock behind the bar, which hadn't worked right in 15 years, said it was 3:47, which it had said since 2003. But they all knew it was past midnight, because the quality of the silence had changed. The night had deepened into that hour when all the masks come off, when what's left is just the raw human underneath, unvarnished and usually unpleasant. Can I tell you all something? Maria asked. Her voice was quiet, but in the late-night silence of O'Malley's, everyone heard. Sure, Mickey said. He'd stopped charging for drinks around 11. What was the point? The money wouldn't matter tomorrow. When they sentenced my boy, when the judge said 25 years, I came here. Came straight here from the courthouse, and I sat on that stool. She pointed to the one she was sitting on now. And I cried. Just sat here and cried. And you know what Mickey did? Everyone looked at Mickey, who was suddenly very interested in washing a glass. He didn't say anything, didn't ask what was wrong, didn't try to make me feel better. He just put a beer in front of me and let me cry. And when I was done crying, when I'd cried myself dry, he put another beer there. And I stayed until closing, and he never once asked me to explain myself. What was there to ask? Mickey said. You were in pain. The beer helped. That's the whole story. But that's it, Maria said. That's exactly it. Out there, she gestured toward the world beyond the bar's walls. Out there, everyone wants your story. They want to know why you're sad so they can tell you it's going to be okay, or it's your fault, or here's what you should do. But in here, you just let people be sad. Let them be angry. Let them be whatever they needed to be. Bukowski understood that completely. The world was full of people who wanted to fix you, improve you, help you find meaning or purpose or whatever bullshit they were selling that week. But sometimes, most times, what you needed was just to sit in your shit for a while without someone trying to make it smell better. 1 o'clock? 2? 3? The hours bled together like spilled drinks on a sticky floor. Eddie, the ex-boxer, started telling stories about fights he'd had in the ring. Not the ones he'd won. Nobody cares about those. The ones he'd lost. The one in Fresno where he'd broken 3 ribs and finished the fight anyway because he needed the money. The one in Reno where his opponent had damn near killed him and Eddie had woken up in the hospital 3 days later. The one in Phoenix that ended his career, where his jaw had shattered and they'd had to reconstruct it with metal plates. You know what I learned from boxing? Eddie said, his words slightly slurred. Not from the beer, Eddie didn't drink much, but from the metal plates that made his jaw work wrong. I learned that getting hit hurts less than you think. It's the anticipation that kills you. Once the punch lands, it's just pain, and pain you can handle. It's the waiting for the punch that makes you crazy. Life's like that, Angela said. The bad things that happen aren't as bad as the fear of them happening. Bullshit, Dolores said. Some bad things are exactly as bad as you think they'll be. Worse even. Yeah, Angela conceded. Yeah, you're right. Some things are worse. They sat with that for a while. The truth of it. The world was full of people trying to convince you that it wasn't so bad, that you could overcome anything, that every cloud had a silver lining. But in O'Malley's, on this last night, there was no room for those comfortable lies. The truth was that some things were terrible, and they stayed terrible. And the best you could do was find a place where being terrible was acceptable. 4 a.m. The darkest hour, they called it. The hour when suicides happen, when hearts give out, when the body realizes it's been running on fumes and decides to just stop. But O'Malley's kept going. Mickey kept pouring. The regulars kept drinking. Because this was it. This was the end. And they were going to see it through to the bitter conclusion. Frank started talking about the plant closing. It had been 10 years, but the wound was still fresh. 1,500 jobs gone overnight. The union had tried to fight it. But what could they do? The company had made its decision. Cheaper to move production to Mexico, to China, to anywhere the workers couldn't afford to demand dignity along with their paychecks. I was 48 when they closed it, Frank said. 48 years old with a high school education and 30 years of experience doing one thing. One thing that didn't matter anymore. You know how many jobs I applied for? 473. I counted. And you know how many interviews I got? 11. And you know how many jobs I got? 0. What did you do? Tommy asked. I came here. Every day for 6 months, I came here. Sat on this stool, drank beer, and wondered what the hell I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. Eventually, I figured it out. What was it? Nothing. I was supposed to do nothing. I was supposed to accept that my productive years were over and I was just going to spend whatever time I had left getting by. Getting old. Getting forgotten. The bleakness of it hung in the air, like smoke. But nobody tried to contradict him, to tell him it wasn't so bad, that he still had value. Because they all knew. They were all living variations of the same story. The system had chewed them up, spit them out, and moved on without a backward glance. Bukowski lit another cigarette. His lungs hurt. They'd been hurting for years. But what was he going to do? Quit? Save himself for a future that didn't want him anyway? Better to burn out here, in this place, among these people, than to die clean and sober in some sterile facility where they'd pump him full of morphine and pretend it was a good death. 5 o'clock. The sky outside was starting to lighten, that pre-dawn glow that promised nothing except another day of the same shit. "Last call," Mickey said, and his voice broke on the words. Nobody moved to order. They all had drinks. They were pacing themselves for this final stretch. Dolores started crying, silent tears running down her face, cutting tracks through her makeup. Angela put an arm around her, and they sat like that, two broken women holding each other in the dim light of a dying bar. "I don't know where I'm going to go," Dolores said. This was the only place that felt like home. "We'll find somewhere," Angela said. But they both knew she was lying. There was nowhere else like O'Malley's. The city had moved on. The gentrifiers had won. In a year, this whole block would be unrecognizable. Artisanal coffee shops and boutique gyms and restaurants where a salad cost $20. No room for people like them. No room for the broken, the poor, the ones who'd lost the race and didn't care to run anymore. Tommy pulled out a harmonica and started playing. Bukowski didn't know he could play. But the sound that came out was mournful and beautiful. A blues that spoke to everything they were feeling. The end of things. The passing of time. The way places die just like people do, and usually for the same reasons. Nobody wanted them anymore. They sat and listened. Even the jukebox seemed to respect the moment, staying silent while Tommy played. The music filled the bar, wrapped around them like a blanket, held them together for these final moments. When he finished, nobody applauded. You don't applaud a dirge. "My father used to play," Tommy said. Before the drink got him, he'd play at night after work, sitting on the porch. Blues mostly. Said the blues was the only music that told the truth. "What truth?" Sammy asked. "That we're all dying. That nothing lasts. That the best you can hope for is to make some noise on your way out so people know you were here." 6 o'clock. The sun was up now, harsh light creeping through the windows, exposing every stain, every crack, every sign of decay. In the dark, O'Malley's had dignity. In the daylight, it was just a dump. But they all knew that. They'd always known that. The magic wasn't in the place itself. It was in what they brought to it. Mickey started closing up, turning off the beer taps, wiping down the bar one last time. His movements were slow, ritualistic. This was more than cleaning. This was saying goodbye. "I should tell you all something," Mickey said, and everyone looked up. Mickey didn't do speeches. Mickey barely did sentences. "When my wife left me, when she took the kids and moved to Seattle, I thought about killing myself. Seriously thought about it. Had the gun loaded, had it in my mouth. And you know what stopped me?" Nobody answered. They were all listening. This place. I thought, who's going to run the bar? And I know that sounds stupid. I know it was just an excuse, but it was enough. I figured I'd give it another day. And then another. And eventually, I stopped thinking about the gun. I started thinking about you guys instead. About how you needed somewhere to go. And that gave me something. Not happiness. I was never happy after she left. But purpose, maybe. Or just routine. Something to do besides die. He paused, looked around at all of them. "So, I want to thank you. for giving me a reason to keep going, even if it was just slinging beer to a bunch of degenerates. "We love you too, Mickey," Angela said, and she wasn't joking. 7 o'clock, time to go. They filed out slowly, one by one, saying goodbye to the space, to each other, to the version of themselves that had existed in this place. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars passing, people heading to work, the machinery of normal life grinding on, indifferent to the small tragedy occurring on the corner of Vermont and Eighth. Bukowski was the last to leave, aside from Mickey. He stood in the doorway, looking back at the bar, the empty stools, the dead jukebox, the pool table where he'd lost more games than he could count. "You going to be okay?" he asked Mickey. Mickey shrugged. "I'll figure something out. Always do." "What are you going to do with the place, after?" "Nothing. Developer takes it tomorrow. They'll gut it. Turn it into something useful, something profitable." "Fuck them." "Yeah, fuck them." They shook hands. 30 years of history in that handshake. 30 years of late nights and early mornings, of confessions and silences, of being accepted without judgment in a world that judged everything. Bukowski walked out into the morning. The sun was too bright. It always was. He headed home, back to his apartment, back to his typewriter, back to the business of turning all of this into words that might matter to someone, someday. Behind him, Mickey locked the door to O'Malley's for the last time. The click of the deadbolt sounded like the period at the end of a sentence. Final. Absolute. Done. The bar was dead. Long live the bar. But here's the thing about places like O'Malley's, they never really die. They live on in the people who spent time there, in the stories they tell, in the memories they carry. The building might become condos, the corner might change, but the spirit of it, the truth of what it was, that persists. Because O'Malley's wasn't really about the place. It was about the permission it gave. Permission to be broken, to be lost, to be anything other than okay. Permission to sit in your pain without someone trying to fix it. Permission to exist on the margins of a world that had no use for margins anymore. And maybe that's what we're all looking for. Not happiness, not success. Just a place where we can be ourselves, completely and without apology, even if, especially if, ourselves is a mess. The sun climbed higher. The city went about its business. And somewhere, in apartments and cheap hotels scattered across Los Angeles, the regulars from O'Malley's woke up to a world that had one less sanctuary in it. They'd survive. People like that always survive. But they'd carry the loss with them. Another scar in a collection of scars. Another reminder that nothing good lasts. Especially not the things that matter to people who don't matter. Bukowski got home and sat at his typewriter. Put a piece of paper in, stared at it for a while. Then he started typing. The neon sign outside O'Malley's had been flickering for 3 years. Because that's what you do with endings. You write them down. You make them permanent. You turn loss into something that might outlast the thing that was lost. The words came slowly at first, then faster. The whole night spilling out onto the page. Every conversation, every silence, every moment of shared humanity in that dying bar. He wrote until his fingers hurt, until the sun was high in the sky, until he'd captured as much as language could capture, which was never enough, but was all he had. When he finished, he pulled the last page from the typewriter and read what he'd written. It was rough. It would need editing. But it was true. That was the important thing. It was true. He thought about Mickey, locking that door for the last time. About Angela and Dolores holding each other and crying. About Sammy and his philosophy of losing. About Tommy and his harmonica. About all of them, the beautiful losers who'd made O'Malley's what it was. And he thought about all the other O'Malleys out there, all the dive bars and corner taverns and hole-in-the-wall joints that were disappearing one by one, victims of progress and profit and the relentless march of a future that had no use for the past. They were dying, all of them. And with them died a certain kind of honesty, a certain acceptance of human limitation, a certain willingness to let people be broken without demanding they put themselves back together. The world was becoming shinier, cleaner, more efficient. And in the process, it was losing space for the people who didn't shine, who were messy, who had given up on efficiency in favor of just getting through another day. Maybe that was inevitable. Maybe progress required casualties. Maybe there was no room for O'Malley's in whatever was coming next. But Bukowski had been there. He'd borne witness. And now it existed on paper, in words, preserved like an insect in amber. Not the same as the real thing, but better than nothing. He poured himself a drink. Beer, cheap and cold, the same kind Mickey served. Raised the glass to the empty apartment, to the ghosts of the night before, to all the lost places and lost people who'd never get monuments or markers. To O'Malley's, he said out loud, and to all you beautiful bastards who made it home. Then he drank, and the beer was good. And outside his window, the city continued its transformation, erasing the past one building at a time, replacing memory with steel and glass and the empty promise of better days ahead. But in that moment, in his apartment, with his words still fresh on the page, O'Malley's lived, and would continue to live, as long as someone read those words and understood what was lost when places like that disappeared. Because that's the thing about writing. It's the only immortality available to places and people who don't matter to anyone important. A bar closes, a building falls, but the words remain. Imperfect testimony to imperfect lives, but testimony nonetheless. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it has to be. The day wore on. Bukowski sat at his window, drinking, smoking, watching the city move below him. Somewhere out there, the regulars were dealing with the first day of their new reality. Finding new bars, new routines, new ways to fill the hours between birth and death. They'd be okay. They'd always been okay, in their way. They'd survive this like they'd survived everything else. Badly, but completely. And years from now, when someone asked them about O'Malley's, they'd tell stories. Exaggerated probably, sentimental maybe, but true in the ways that mattered. They'd remember the feeling of that place, the safety of it, the permission it granted. And they'd remember that last night, when they all came together to mark the passing of something that most of the world would never know existed. A funeral for a dive bar, attended by the only mourners who mattered, the ones who'd spent their lives there. That was worth something. Had to be. Outside, the sun set. The sky turned orange, then purple, then black. The city lights came on, bright and sterile, illuminating streets that had never looked more empty. Bukowski finished his beer, thought about going out, finding another bar. But what was the point? No bar would be O'Malley's. No place would understand the way that place had understood. So he stayed home, stayed with his typewriter and his memories and his words. Because that's all that was left now. That's all there ever was, really. Words, memory, loss. And the knowledge that nothing lasts, no matter how much it should. The end came, like it always does. Quiet, final, without ceremony. Just a door locking, a light going out, a space that had been full becoming empty. O'Malley's was dead. Long live O'Malley's. So that's it. The last night at the bar. The end of a place that mattered to people who didn't. Tell me, where are you hearing this from? And give me a number, 0 to 10. Does this land? Does it matter? Drop it in the comments. I want to know if this story found its people. The ones who understand why a dive bar's death is worth mourning. Why loss doesn't always come with meaning attached. Why sometimes the end is just the end, and we have to sit with that.